It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy. Back to Talk Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I take my first pass at the commander in front of us on a budget on my quest to brew the magic world. You know the motto, baby. It's ABB, always be brewing, and that's what we're back to do today. The deck list is going to be down in the description for you below. So also, I'd really appreciate if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe, consider doing all that YouTube stuff. I'd appreciate it. But today, we're finally getting to the commander I expect a lot of people are waiting to look at and or build from Edge of Eternities, and that's Ragost, Deft, Gastronaut. A Boros 2-mana 2/2 lobster citizen that says all of our artifacts are food in addition to the other types and have 2 tap, sack it to gain 3 life. That's the reminder text for food. 1 and a tap to sacrifice the food. It deals 3 damage to each opponent. This is the thing that Ragost really is going to care about and that we want to take advantage of. At the beginning of each end step, if we've gained life this turn, we can untap Ragost. So a very interesting couple lines of text, and something we're going to try our best to take advantage of. So all of our artifacts are foods. We could pay 1, tap him, and sack a food to deal 3 to every opponent. And if we manage to gain life on each turn, we untap Ragost. And that's what we're going to try to do. We're going to try to find a way to tap Ragost as many times as we can to sacrifice an artifact to deal 3 and get him to untap. So what we're going to talk about is how we're going to try to do that and keep the party going. But I want to say a quick thank you to the channel members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you're interested in seeing all of our videos just a teeny bit early for just $1 a month, consider supporting the channel down below. All right. Well, all of our artifacts are foods. So in a lot of ways, we can make a lot of things. But I think there's a lot of ways that we can approach that. So one card you're going to see talked about a lot, and it's talked about for a good reason, is a caddy manufacturer. So whenever you'd make a clue, food, or treasure, you make one of each instead. So as long as we would go to try to make a food, treasure, or clue, we're going to make all three of them are going to be foods, right, effectively for the purpose of Ragost. So you'll just make 3 tokens, but the useful thing here is you're getting more foods out of it. Apothecary White says whenever you attack, you make a food for each player being attacked. This is really nice, allowing you to get a couple food per turn, right? Because the key for Ragost is Ragost is we need food to use his ability. So we need to make sure we have enough to keep using it and keep dealing out the damage. And then we can tap her and tap a bunch of foods to make a bunch of creature tokens if we want to, but it's not as important as making the food that way. Astrid says whenever it enters or attacks, we make a food, and whenever we sack a clue or food, she explores. So remember, you reveal the top card, put that card in your hand if it's a land, otherwise put a counter on her and put the card back or into the graveyard. With White, I don't mean that the making the humans isn't useful. I'm just saying it's not what we're trying to do in the deck. But I mean, if you have 20 artifacts, tap 20 artifacts and get 20 humans. Like there's a lot of ways you could look at Apothecary's ability. I just mean that it's not specifically what we're trying to do. Now, the Gaffer's a nice ability. If we would gain 3 or more life in a turn, at everybody's end step, if we gain 3 or more life that turn, we draw a card. It is a really nice ability and can hopefully interact with our foods. And then the other card that's been going around the internet and it works really well with Ragost is Nuka-Cola vending machine. So you could pay to get a food out of it, but whenever you sack a food, you make a tap treasure. Remember that all of our artifacts are foods. So basically, whenever you sacrifice an artifact, you're going to make a treasure, which is also a food. So you're kind of always rinsing, repeating through that. We're going to talk about why that matters in a second. For one of our combos, we're going to talk about that's going to matter. But just know that Nuka-Cola is going to always spit you out more artifacts every time we sack a food for something. Okay. Well, we're going to have a lot of artifacts come in and care about a lot of artifacts. So I think we want to find ways to pay that off. Crime Novelist is a 1/3 that whenever we sack an artifact, we get a counter on it and add a red mana. I like the idea that we could build it, right? It could become a nice threat over the course of a couple turns as we're sacking our foods and treasures and other things. Goblin Engineer, when it comes in, let's just go get an artifact and put it into our graveyard and then shuffle our library. And then, as long as we can tap it to sacrifice an artifact to bring that artifact back. Notably for Engineer, you can bring Nuka-Cola vending machine back, which I think is one of the most important targets for it, specifically for this deck. So it's good to know that you can do that. We have the new Halia. Whenever another creature or artifact comes in, we gain a life. Very important to potentially help us untap Ragost, so we should keep that in the back of our mind. And then we draw a card if we've gained 3 or more life this turn. So again, I like this. She can help us potentially untap Ragost every turn as we do certain abilities. Illustrious Wanderglyph makes them 1/1 gnome on everybody's upkeep. Remember, the gnomes are foods with Ragost out, so that's very helpful. And then buffs all of our other artifact creatures as long as we have the City's Blessing. Workless Fireweaver is going to deal out some damage whenever an artifact comes in. Could be useful, right? I mean, we only need a few triggers of it to really be helpful, right? Alongside this damage outlet with Ragost. And then Rosy Cotton. Whenever we would make a token, we put a counter on a creature other than Rosie. This is really fun because then we can start growing our creatures and having some other threats outside of just tapping or untapping Ragost for its ability. Stridehanger Automaton says whenever we make a token, we make that many tokens plus a Thopter. Again, Thopter will also be a food, but it's also a creature, and it buffs all other Thopters. I like this. It gives us another outlet and potentially gives us a nice army of flying Thopters. Weft Stalker Arden, again, damage to each opponent whenever an artifact or creature enters. So again, very useful, dealing out that damage, making sure that we can hurt our opponents. Scrap Heap says whenever an artifact or enchantment is put into our graveyard from play, you gain a life. So this will actually gain us life when we're sacrificing those artifacts. Pretty useful, depending on what we can get up to in a turn. Transmutation Font can tap to make a blood, clue, or food, which is pretty cool. Again, note that all of them would be foods, but that doesn't change their name. That just changed their types. And then you could pay 3 to sack 3 artifact tokens with different names to just go get an artifact and put it on the battlefield. This is a really nice ability because then you can go get the key things that you need at sorcery speed and set up, your lines and the things that you want. Weapons manufacturer, whenever another non-token artifact comes in, we make a munitions token. The munition token says when this token leaves the battlefield, it does 2 damage to any target. So again, the munitions token isn't a bad thing for Ragost's ability, dealing out some extra damage to somebody along the way. And then the bonus sheet got that great reprint of Inventor Sphere. It's been needing it for a while. At the beginning of your upkeep, you gain a life if you have 3 more artifacts, and then for 4 mana, you can sack it to go get an artifact and put it in your hand as long as you have 3 or more artifacts. So again, a great land for us to help us get a key artifact we need at the right time. Okay, so what I think also makes a lot of sense in this deck is trying to pay off Ragost's ability, right? Specifically, is there any way we can either get multiple versions of his ability or untap him? So something like Basilisk Collar is going to give Ragost lifelink. Well, Ragost is going to deal 3 damage to our opponents. With a Basilisk Collar, that's going to gain us 9 life, and Ragost is going to untap at the end of turn. Great, then we can continue, right, to use Ragost's abilities hopefully on everybody's turn. Marvin says that he has all activated abilities of creatures you control that don't have the same name as Marvin, meaning Marvin won't have the top and bottom texts of Ragost, making things into food, but he will be able to tap and sack a food to deal 3 damage to each opponent. So now we have a second outlet, right, to deal out the damage, right? The only difference is Marvin can't untap, whereas Ragost will. But I think the extra is important and is a big deal if we can see it. Now, remember that Ragost's ability is an activated ability that isn't a mana ability. So we can use something like Battle Mage's Bracers. It says whenever an ability of an equipped creature is activated, if it isn't a mana ability, we can pay 1. If we do, we can just copy that ability. So now Ragost is dealing 6 every time for 2 mana total, right? 1 for his ability and 1 for the Bracers. So that's pretty cool, right? You also have something like Illusionist Bracers that does the same thing. It you don't have to pay for it. You just equip and then it does it automatically. Caduceus is another way to give Ragost lifelink, so that way you make sure that he gains life when he deals the damage. It also adds Indestructible if you're at 30 or more life, which is really nice. And remember, this lifelink can also trigger things like the Gaffer and Halia and some of these other abilities that care about lifelink. Now, someone out there, me, read this ability and said, "Oh, if I give Ragost Infect, we only need to make 4 triggers happen, or potentially less than that, depending on what you have." And that's what the Exoskeletons for. It's one of the only ways in these colors we could give Ragost Infect. Remember, a creature with Infect deals damage to players in the form of poison counters. A player only needs 10 poison counters to lose the game. So Exoskeleton is probably the most ideal on Ragost, but also could be attached to other things. Maybe you grow a creature, with other things out and you just knock somebody for it. Again, the Exoskeleton is going to help us close out some games. Patriarch Seal lets us pay 1 to untap a creature, so we could potentially use Ragost twice in one turn. Sting is one I think is really fun. So at the beginning of each combat, you untap the equipped creature. So what I think is really fun with Sting is on everybody's combat, you're going to get a trigger to untap Ragost. And the cool part is you could then tap him in response to the ability to do the damage, and then untap him and immediately tap him again right? To get 6 damage per turn instead of 3. And this is just one example, right, of a way that you could start building up, right, more of that damage per turn. Patriarch Seal and Thousand Years Elixir do very similar things. They're just going to untap him, right, once per turn. But I like Sting because now you're getting 2 of these triggers per turn. Remember, the goal is to gain life to untap Ragost, so we can do this on everybody's turn. And this is hopefully a combination that should help us take out people very quickly. And then a couple ways to give him lifelink: Feldar, Umbra, Spirit Loop, Shelter by Ghost. All these are going to give Ragost lifelink, so that, again, we're gaining life when he activates his ability, which is going to untap him to allow us to do it again. Now, Feldar Umbra does let us move it if we want to, which is a very interesting ability. Spirit Loop, when it gets put in the graveyard, gets put back into our hand, which is nice for when Ragost comes back down. Shelter by Ghost exiles a non-land permanent while it's out and gives Ragost Ward 2, which is important as well. But the point is the lifelink, but it's nice that each of these adds some other ways to take advantage. And this does also pack that Totem Armor, so it will protect Ragost the first time it's destroyed, which is interesting. Okay, so there's a lot of ways you can take advantage of combos in this deck. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole. You can find them on EDH Rec, and I'm sure there's people that make videos. Probably one of my favorite that only technically involves, it actually doesn't even need a Ragost to be out. If you have these 3 artifacts out, you can do this without Ragost. Ragost does make it easier in the sense that he can help you out with damage in the background. But basically, it requires all 3 of these to be on the battlefield. Remember, Manufacturer says whenever you make a clue, food, or treasure, you make 1 of each. Nuclear Vending Machine says whenever you sacrifice a food, you make a tapped treasure. So that would, again, with the Manufacturer, that would make all 3. And then Grinding Station says you can tap and sacrifice an artifact to have a player mill 3 cards. And then whenever an artifact comes in, you untap the Grinding Station. So the way this is going to work, and it's not going to take very long to do this, you're going to sacrifice a food to the Grinding Station to mill 1 of your opponents for 3. Vending Machine is going to see you sack the food and try to make you a treasure, except Manufacturer is going to make you a treasure of food and a clue, right? Well, you're going to have 3 triggers of Grinding Station untapping, right, on the stack. You're going to respond to the first one by sacking the clue or the treasure, or respond to the second one by, sacking the other of the clue or the treasures, and then you respond to the third one by letting it untap, and then, sacrifice the food, and now you're starting this loop over again, right? Milling 9 cards at a time of all your opponent's libraries, milling them out, and, causing the game to end when they try to draw a card. Again, this is just one combo. The thing I like about this combo is this is a card we really care about, this is a card we really care about, so it's not going to be very hard to find this Grinding Station. Remember, we talked about things like Sting just being very good with Ragost. I mean, there's a lot of ways to quote unquote combo without ending the game like this one does. Now, this, of course, anybody can remove any of these 3 pieces and this breaks apart. But the important part is that if you have all 3 of these up, we can maintain priority. We can just, or we have no responses, right? We can mill all our opponents out. And that's just one way to end the game. I think more often than not, it's going to be Ragost damage. Don't get me wrong, this is not a way I expect to end the game, but it's an option for you if you can find all the pieces. Again, 2 of these are pieces we want, so it's not going to be very hard to at least put this together rudimentally at some point. But I've said it before on the show, and I'll say it again. No deck's ever complete. This is my first shot at Ragost, and I think going into testing, we can find other ways to sacrifice artifacts. Like Arcbound Ravager was one I thought about. You can sack it to put a counter on it. This works out really well with Nuka-Cola Vending Machine. Like, if you had Arcbound Ravager attack somebody and it wasn't blocked, you could basically continue sacking foods to put counters on Ravager to the point that it could knock somebody out. We could also give this flying or lifelink or whatever, and then we'd be having a pretty great time with the Ravager. So it's an option of another creature to add in there. Karn was one I thought about. His ultimate says you can tap an untapped artifact to deal a damage to any target. Note it has to be an untapped artifact, so this doesn't work with something like a Nuka-Cola Vending Machine, because remember, the artifacts come in tapped. But I mean, if you amass enough artifacts, I feel like this emblem is eventually going to make a difference. He does let you tick one up to make a Power Stone, which is a food, right, for purposes of Ragost. So that's pretty cool. And you can dig with it. I just think Karn's an interesting planeswalker, and it could be a spot in here for you if you want to have a little bit of fun. And then you have something like Skrelv's Hive that can just make the mites that are also artifacts. So they're going to be foods. they could be sack fodder for you, or they could be a nice way to threaten people with toxic one. My thought was like, how can we make artifact tokens every turn, every one of our turns, so that we have them laying around? And Scroll's Hive was a option. I'm not saying it's the best option, but it's something to consider. But let's get into our playtest. Remember, the goal of playtest on our channel is not to find magical Christmas land. It's not just to show off all our best plays, but it's to get in some gameplay scenarios and kind of understand what are the hands we're looking for, and how do we how we're going to set up our game plan. It's a little awkward hand in that we don't have red mana, but we have enough things to play. We have the implementation, which can draw us a card if we needed to sacrifice it. The important thing to note here is it becomes a food with Ragost out, and if we sack it to Ragost, it'll still draw us a card. We have the Spirit Loop, we have some removal, we have Astrid, which can explore whenever we sack a food, and we have the Basilisk Color. I think we have almost everything we could want. The truth is we just don't have the red mana, and I think I'm willing to take the gamble. Well, okay. There we go. Turn 1, we draw the Great Furnace, which is pretty great. I guess there's the argument here to go Plains into the Implement, now that I think about it. So then on turn 2, we go Furnace into Ragost, so that the next turn we can sack the Implement to it. I guess that I guess makes a ton of sense if I think about it. Why not set ourselves up for the benefit there? And of course we draw the Manufacturer too. Now we just need a way to make an artifact token, which I don't have at the moment. I'm trying to think, does it make more sense to get the Basilisk Collar on there? I guess we could loop and then sacrifice the Implement, right? Which would draw a card. Everybody would lose 3. We'd gain 9, and we'd be in half decent shape. There's the Henge. Retriever could get the things like the Implement back. So this is a way to, sack the Retriever, get the Implement back if we wanted to. Oh, that's right. Astrid makes a food when it comes in. So maybe it was Astrid plus the Implement last turn. And then Spirit later. But oh well, we're not, we made our decisions we made. We'll get the Manufacturer in this turn, and then Ragost can just attack. I mean, it can just attack. It's a 2/2 with lifelink if we wanted to, but otherwise I think I'm willing to just wait a turn. But there's instant ramen. It's a food as well. But Astrid, go to make the food. Remember, it makes us a clue and a treasure. And then play the instant ramen. So again, now we have, or sorry, no. We don't want to play instant ramen because we want to leave mana up for Ragost, right? So we use Ragost this turn, sack the treasure to Ragost to deal 3 damage. It deals 9. Astrid's going to explore. I like the Fireweaver. We'll keep it on top. And then he'll untap, right, because of his ability at the end of our turn. On our next opponent's turn, we're going to sack 1 to Ragost to deal 3 damage around again, and we're going to gain 9 life. Astrid's going to explore again. We'll leave the Fireweaver on top now that Astrid's growing, right? And now we come back to our turn. Astrid has to attack to make that food. I think of what Fireweaver hold up enough mana to Ragost on everybody's turn, because Astrid attacks make us the food clue treasure, right? 3 damage from the Fireweaver there. Again, Ragost one of them this turn. Doesn't really matter. Deal the damage. Astrid is going to explore. There we go. Untap. Do it on. Now we can do it on their other opponents. Right. We have enough mana to do it 2 more times. Right. So we'll just simulate that. Astrid exploring. We'll leave Marvin on top both times. Right. Now, we have Marvin. Marvin's going to be great once it can untap with. Once it can tap to use, right, Ragost's ability. And I think we just leave out the mana Astrid attacks, right? Getting the food. And I think we're in a nice loop here. Yes, it's provided on somebody not having block at Astrid and killing it, or no one having removal for Ragost. But I don't think it really matters. I think we're in good shape. And if we have to replay Ragost, we replay it. Otherwise, I think we can keep this loop up because we're attacking with Astrid making the foods. Everybody's losing 9 on every rotation around the battlefield, and then 12 total for my turn. So we're in great shape. And then starting on our next turn, we'll actually be able to use Marvin as well to make it 15 per table round if nobody has a way to deal with it. A little Christmas landy, but I think it's important to show kind of that framework, right, coming together of what we're trying to get towards. Here, 2-lander with the Boros Signet. So we have 3 mana there. We have the Weft Walker, again, damage when artifacts come in. There's the Retriever to get something back. There's the Automaton. So if we were to make a token, we make the Thopter. So we're getting extras there. And then the Shelter. All we need is really a way to make foods, I think. And we're in good shape. I think that's the one thing we're missing is just a way to make foods. Okay, well, there's Apothecary. There's our way to make foods. So I'm trying to think what makes the most sense. Ragost plus the Retriever. This turn, Apothecary, attack to make the foods. I guess by this plan, we need an attack for. I guess we can just give up the Retriever to make a food, right? And then if the Retriever gets blocked, we could just sack it to Ragost, right? Because it's a food, right? With Ragost's ability, we could just sack it to Ragost to deal the damage. We're getting darn close. I think now, right? It's Stridehunger, sheltered by ghosts on Ragost, take out something of our opponents, and then Apothecary can attack. She's probably a pretty safe attack on turn 5. Ragost might be as well as a 3/2 with lifelink. But worst case scenario, Apothecary makes us a food, which also makes us a Thopter, right? So now we've got 3 things, and Ragost is going to untap because of his ability. So I think ideally we'd want to attack with 2 creatures. So ideally we'd want to attack with Ragost, but again, we're not going to put Ragost in harm's way, right? For just that. So I think worst case scenario, this is a nice rounder on the table of all of our opponent's turns. Did we have the mana for it? Because we just have to tap, right, to play for it. I think we just played the Sheltered, right? Or did we play the Stridehanger this turn? If we played the Stridehanger this turn, it's okay. We just do this once, and it's not that big of a deal, right? We still have some good value coming back into our turn. Solfim's a ton of fun. This would deal double the damage to each opponent, which is pretty nice. Solfim would still allow us to have 3 mana to do it on each of our opponent's turns, right? Attack with the Apothecary. Get a couple more. I think we could probably pretty safely attack with Ragost, I would imagine, since it's going to deal double the damage. But if not, again, it's just 4 now. We have enough for everybody's turn and the mana to do it. We should have 3 mana left here. He's dealing 6 at a time now, and I think we're just in good shape. The Thopters can, maybe if we can retain the Thopters, they could also help back us up, right? Going to playtest number 3 here. Keeping a 3-lander with a Nimbicol, way to make a bunch of gnomes, right? Artifacts that are going to be foods. There's the Weft Walker. There's Shadow Spear, another way to give Ragost lifelink, and then Spirit Loop as well. We've got a decent start here. Note that Shadow Spear could also be a food if we need it to be, but I obviously don't see where we would. Turn 3 here, we have Tezzeret, which can untap Ragost once on our turn. Whenever an artifact comes in, we put a counter on it. Like, my thought is a Nimbicol. If I have an attack with Ragost where it's not going to die here, I just think I Nimbicol and make the gnome. But if I'm worried about not having the attacks, maybe we get the Wef Walker in this turn and look to do like a Nimbicall next turn plus, leave up a mana to tap Ragost and sack it or something. I'm just trying to think of like ways we could protect our board. Then, then my thought is a Nimbicall, leave the mana up to sack a food, attack with like the Wef Walker. A Nimbicall gets a counter, and then a Gnome. The Gnome is going to trigger this, dealing the damage. Then Ragost could sack it and deal the damage if we wanted to, right? We have to put one of our creatures in harm's way here. Unfortunately, it might have to be the Arden, because I don't know that I want to just give up. I don't want to just give up Ragost if I have to, right? But I think we do need to give up something in order to attack and get the Gnome. And then we don't even have to do this right now, right? We can do it on anybody's turn. It comes back to our turn. I think we need to get the Shadow Spear on, or we could get the Spirit Loop on. But I like the Shadow Spear just because it gives the +1/+1. I've got 3 mana left. I think I just go to attack. Nimbicall makes 2 more Gnomes, 2 more damage to everybody. Now I have enough Gnomes to do this on everybody's turn, right? Dealing 3 to each opponent, untapping because I'm gaining life, right? And we don't mind giving up the Gnomes because they won't matter for Nimbicall's future things. And we're dealing damage to our opponents. And then we come back to our turn. Again, we're going to get 3 Gnomes this turn when we attack. We could get something like Tezzeret in if we wanted to. Would give us more Gnomes. Right, or it would give us, it would grow when we do the Gnomes, and then this -7's kind of interesting. Like, we get the Battle Bracers down. The problem is that just don't have enough to equip it and still use his ability. Wellspring could go get us a land. I want to ideally keep up 3 mana, right, to use it on everybody's turn. So I think it's just using the Wellspring to go get a land. Again, attacking. We can even attack with an Nimbicall, right, depending on where the attacks are. Getting 3 Gnomes. And then now we could sack the Wellspring, right, to Ragost, because it's a food as well, and it would just go get us another. Is it to hand? To hand. But we could still play this turn. We could even sack it to Ragost, right? And now we've got 1, 2, 3 with the 3 mana we have left, right? And let's just go, put a Plains in our hand. The whole point here is, right, to keep ramping ourselves up on mana. So there's Krark. It can sack an artifact to hurl us mana. There's some some things we can do with that. But 7's not bad enough to get the Bracers on now. It still leaves us 2 mana. Well, if I go Krark, 3 for the Bracers, sack the Gnome to equip. Right, go to a combat, attack, make 4 Gnomes, sack a Gnome for the double colorless to pay for Bracers. That would untap. We would just have to use 2 at a time, but we're dealing 6 damage instead of 3. And we're still dealing the damage here. Okay, that wasn't as ideal, but I think it still got us somewhere, and I think it still goes to show us the core of that idea working. We just need to figure out the mechanics, right? But let me know, what do you think of Ragost down in the comment section below? I think it's a really interesting deck. I have a feeling I'm going to see it at some point. Of course, people are going to love the Lobster. I think it's a great deck. It's got lots of combo potential. I'd love to know what you're doing with Ragost down in the comment section below, and I will catch you on the next.